My name is Jade Caraway. I'm 33 years old, and until one Wednesday morning at 5:47 a.m., I was the person keeping an entire financial system from collapsing. I didn't know that yet when my phone started buzzing on the nightstand. Video call, unknown meeting link, calendar notification that didn't belong to any meeting I remembered scheduling. I was still half asleep when I padded into the kitchen, splashed cold water on my face, and accepted the call. The clock on the microwave read 5:52 a.m. The sun hadn't even considered rising yet. Then his face appeared. Perfectly dressed, perfectly awake. Too awake for someone calling another human being before dawn. Warren Hollister. Beside him in a smaller box sat Nina from HR. Her expression already told me everything. Tight smile, shoulders slightly hunched. The look of someone who knows she's about to participate in something wrong, but has convinced herself it's just process. Warren didn't bother with pleasantries. He launched straight into a rehearsed monologue about leadership alignment, communication challenges, and executive direction. Words stacked on top of words, polished and hollow, designed to make a guillotine sound like a gentle nudge toward personal growth. I let him talk for exactly 30 seconds. Just say it, I said. He blinked, thrown off rhythm. We're restructuring the fraud architecture function, he said carefully. Your position is being eliminated effective immediately. I stared at him, at the clock, at the sheer audacity of saying eliminated at 6 in the morning. That's a firing, I said. You fired me. Let's not play language games. Nina jumped in with paperwork, severance details, non-disparagement clauses, equipment return instructions. Corporate euthanasia delivered in bullet points. My system access was already gone. Email, VPN, internal documentation, all revoked. They'd locked the doors before knocking. 7 minutes. That's how long it took to erase 8 years of work. 8 years of late nights, crisis calls, emergency patches, and impossible deadlines. 8 years of protecting banks from bleeding millions while executives collected bonuses for work they couldn't explain. My title had been Director of Fraud Architecture. The reality was simpler. I was the one people called when everything broke, when regulators hovered, when fraud spikes threatened reputations and lawsuits. And now I was done. Warren ended the call with, "I wish you the best in your future endeavors." The screen went black. The apartment was silent except for the hum of the refrigerator. I sat there long after the call ended, staring at nothing. My brain still trying to follow routines that no longer existed. At 7:30, my boyfriend Marcus came out of the bedroom, phone already in hand, scrolling through social media like the world hadn't just tilted off its axis. He froze when he saw me still sitting at the table. "You're still here," he said. "Don't you have that bank thing this morning?" I got fired. He blinked. Processed. Fired. Like laid off. "No," I said, "like fired, at 6 a.m. on a video call." He didn't hug me, didn't ask if I was okay. He frowned instead. "What about the mortgage?" he asked. "And the car payment?" "We already told people about the Cabo trip. This is embarrassing." Embarrassing. I nodded slowly. "I'll figure it out. 3-month severance, non-compete's narrow." He didn't look relieved. He looked disappointed. "Well," he said finally, "I hope you know what you're doing." Then he walked back into the bedroom and turned on the shower. I sat there alone, the weight settling in my chest, not just from losing my job, but from realizing something else had been gone for much longer. My phone buzzed. A text from an unknown number. "Hey Jade, it's Eddie from IT. Using my personal phone because, work stuff's toast. Random question, did you know your account access got killed at 5:38 this morning?" Auto ticket flagged it. I stared at the timestamp. They'd locked me out before the call even started. And suddenly the morning felt a lot darker than the sky outside. I didn't always know Warren Hollister was going to destroy my career. At first, he was just another executive parachuted in from somewhere else with a resume full of confident verbs and a smile that looked rehearsed in a mirror. He arrived about 18 months before the morning he erased me, announced as the new vice president of operations, and immediately began behaving like the building should thank him for existing inside it. His suits were expensive and tailored within an inch of their life. His handshake lingered a beat too long. His voice carried the practiced warmth of someone who knew exactly how to sound impressive without actually saying anything. The first week, he called a company-wide meeting. 57 slides. I counted. They were filled with phrases like synergistic alignment, cross-functional optimization, and leveraging core competencies. Not one slide explained how fraud detection actually worked. Not one mentioned chargebacks, behavioral modeling, or regulatory exposure. Nothing about PCI compliance. Nothing about the real systems that kept our clients from losing millions. I sat in the back, arms crossed, watching him click through jargon like it was a talent show. The thing about Warren was this: he wasn't stupid. He just wasn't competent at the work. He could read a room. He could charm board members who didn't know the difference between an API and a PDF. He made executives feel smart without ever forcing them to confront what they didn't understand. And in corporate environments, that's a lethal skill. Put an actual technical problem in front of him, though, and his eyes glazed over like someone had started reading the phone book in another language. Worse, he needed to be the smartest person in every room. He interrupted engineers mid-sentence to add context that added nothing. He dismissed suggestions only to repeat them later as his own. He took credit for ideas he'd overheard in hallways. And when someone knew more than him really knew more, he felt it like a personal attack. Within 3 months, he reorganized 2 departments for no clear reason. Fired a senior analyst who'd been with the company a decade because she asked too many questions in meetings, questions that made him look uninformed. And then he started showing up to my team's stand-ups uninvited. Just appeared one Monday morning, leaning against the doorway, asking questions that made my engineers exchange looks like they were watching a slow-motion car accident. "Why can't we just simplify this rule set?" he asked once, pointing at a flow diagram he clearly hadn't read. "Because fraud patterns don't simplify themselves," I replied evenly. "They evolve." He smiled like I'd said something adorable. The only person at Vantage who seemed genuinely unbothered by Warren was Eddie, the IT guy. Eddie ran help desk like it was a combination tech support center and one-man podcast, narrating his troubleshooting process to anyone within earshot while somehow fixing things faster than anyone else. One night during a late system crunch, he leaned back in his chair and said, "You know why Warren doesn't scare me?" Why, I asked. "Because he doesn't look at people. He looks through them. People like that don't see the knife coming." I laughed at the time. I shouldn't have. The real confrontation happened 3 months into Warren's tenure during an operations council meeting. He proposed accelerating the Sentinel 3.0 rollout by 3 months. Sentinel was my system, the fraud detection engine I'd been architecting for 2 years. It processed transactions in real time, ran behavioral analysis on every cardholder, and caught patterns rule-based systems missed entirely. It wasn't a feature. It was the foundation of everything Vantage planned to do for the next decade. The room was full of nodding heads. Everyone wanted to impress the new VP. Nobody wanted to be the person who said no. So I did. I pulled up my timeline and walked them through the dependency chain. Skipping 3 months meant cutting load testing before Black Friday, shipping with known false positives, going live without completed PCI certification. "We're not risking bugs," I said, looking directly at Warren. "We're risking regulatory action, card network penalties, client relationships that took a decade to build." The room went quiet. Warren's face flushed. "I appreciate the analysis," he said tightly, "but we need to be more solution-oriented." "The solution," I replied, "is not shipping a fraud engine before it's ready. That's not negativity. That's competence." And that was the moment I became a problem. I saw it in his eyes, the shift from irritation to calculation. The night before everything changed, I stayed late fixing a critical issue for a major banking client. Traced a misconfigured velocity rule, rebuilt the logic, tested against 6 months of data, pushed the fix by midnight. I came home exhausted. Marcus was already asleep, turned away from me like he had been for months. I set my alarm for 7. I never made it. At 5:47 a.m., my phone buzzed again. That detail mattered later. At the time, all I knew was that my body reacted before my brain did. Adrenaline hit first sharp and cold like I'd already done something wrong and was about to be told exactly how much it would cost me. By 5:52, I was staring at Warren Hollister's face on a video call, watching him pretend this was a normal hour for dismantling someone's life. Nina from HR sat beside him, eyes flicking down to her notes, then back up to the camera like she was afraid if she looked directly at me for too long, she'd have to acknowledge I was a person. Warren spoke for 7 minutes. 7 minutes of corporate anesthesia, leadership alignment, communication patterns, executive direction, a need to transition the team. He never once said the word fired. When the call ended, my email was already dead. VPN locked, internal documentation inaccessible, calendar wiped clean. My name removed from the org chart before anyone else at the company had finished brushing their teeth. They hadn't just fired me. They'd erased me. I sat at the kitchen table staring at the wall when my phone buzzed again. Unknown number. "Eddie, yo Jade, it's Eddie from IT. Using my personal phone BC work stuff is... Yeah, random question. Did you know your account got nuked at 5:38 a.m.? I stared at the timestamp, 5:38. 17 minutes before the call. Me nuke as in Eddie full access kill, VPN email docs admin privileges. Auto ticket pinged me, and I thought it was a glitch. Then I saw the offboarding packet come through. My fingers went cold. Me offboarding packet. Eddie, yeah. HR workflow, standard termination process. Weird thing though, it was timestamped yesterday afternoon. I felt something inside me click into place. Me yesterday. What time? There was a pause. Eddie, 4:47 p.m. Looks like Nina Park submitted it. Approval chain shows Warren signed off at 4:52. Dude moves fast. Yesterday afternoon. While I was still in the office. While I was still employed. While I was still fixing systems for clients who trusted me. Me who submitted the access kill request. Eddie same chain. HR initiated. Warren approved. Like, fully approved. Not provisional. Not pending. Clean execution. I leaned back in my chair, staring at the ceiling. This wasn't a reaction. This was a plan. Eddie, I probably shouldn't be telling you this, but you're the only director who's ever treated me like I wasn't invisible, so loyalty counts, right? Me, I appreciate it. Seriously. Eddie screenshot everything. Documentation matters. I already was. I saved the messages, took screenshots, backed them up to cloud storage, because once you realize someone is willing to rewrite reality, you learn fast that evidence is oxygen. The practical fears hit around 8. Mortgage due in 2 weeks. Health insurance expiring in 30 days. A life built on the assumption of stability suddenly exposed as a sandcastle. But beneath the fear was something else. Clarity. At 8:40, my phone rang again. Theo Marchetti, VP of Operations at First Continental Bank. The client whose system I'd fixed 12 hours earlier. Tell me it's not true, he said. It's true, I replied. Warren Hollister decided my leadership style was too disruptive. There was a pause. You know our platform agreement is up for renewal in 4 months, Theo said slowly. If you land somewhere else before, then somewhere that can actually handle enterprise fraud detection. At scale, call me. I'm not promising anything, but I've worked with you for 5 years. I know which one of you actually understands the work. When we hung up, I opened my personal email. 6 weeks earlier, Cole Ashford, CEO of Prism Financial Technologies, had sent me an offer. Chief Systems Architect, full authority over product direction, equity. I'd closed it without responding. At 9:20 a.m., I typed back. Situation changed. Are you available to talk today? His reply came 20 minutes later. He'd already heard. Cole's reply was short, direct, efficient. Nothing like the corporate theater I'd just been kicked out of. Denver office, 11:00 a.m. if you can make it. I stared at the screen for a moment, then stood up and grabbed my keys. Marcus was still home. He sat on the edge of the bed, scrolling through his phone jaw, tight in a way that told me he'd been rehearsing an argument with someone who wasn't in the room. I'm heading out, I said. He looked up. Where? Meeting. With who? A company. His eyes narrowed. Already. I didn't answer. I didn't owe him a briefing. Not after the way he'd reduced the worst morning of my career to canceled vacations and awkward conversations at work. The drive to Prism's office felt unreal, like I was moving through someone else's life. Red lights, coffee shops opening, people heading into normal days unaware that a single decision could shatter everything they thought was stable. Prism's building didn't look like Vantage. There were windows, actual light. People made eye contact. Someone held the door open and said morning like they meant it. Cole Ashford met me in the lobby himself. Mid-50s, silver hair, no tie. The posture of someone who didn't need to perform authority because he already had it. We've been watching Vantage for years, he said as we walked, promoting the wrong people, ignoring their technical talent, chasing optics over substance. He didn't ask me to justify myself. He asked me what I wanted to build. By 11:20 a.m., the contract was signed. Double my salary, meaningful equity, actual authority. 5.5 hours after Warren tried to end my career, I was in a role that put me in direct competition with the company that had just thrown me away. When I got home that evening, Marcus was packing a bag. I'm staying with my brother for a bit, he said without looking at me. I need space to figure things out. Figure out what I asked. He zipped the bag hard. You got fired after 8 years, Jade, and you're acting like it's nothing. I signed with Prism this morning, I said. Better position, better pay. He froze. You signed somewhere else already, he said. Without talking to me, I didn't realize I needed permission to not be unemployed. He shook his head. This is exactly what I mean. You make decisions like I'm not even here. He walked past me without another word. The door clicked shut. My phone buzzed. A text from Eddie. Eddie update from the trenches. Warren is freaking out about Sentinel, like actual yelling. Also asked me to pull your access logs from the last 6 months, which is weird. What does he think you're hiding? Another notification followed. Forwarded email, sent from a personal account. Subject, Sentinel 3.0 delayed internal announcement. I read it 3 times. Sentinel pushback 6 months. Translation, without me, they had no idea how to ship the product he'd been rushing everyone to deliver. By 2:30 p.m., my phone was lighting up with messages from former colleagues. Clients were panicking. Account managers were scrambling. Legal teams were circling. At 2:40, the first termination notice hit. At 3:15, another. At 3:52, a third. Eddie again. Eddie, it's chaos. Warren just blamed legacy architecture decisions, which I think means you. Also, HR asked me to help rewrite a timeline to make it look like Sentinel delays were planned months ago. That doesn't seem legal. At 4:08, my phone rang. Warren Hollister. I let it ring. It rang again. On the third call, I answered. Jade, he said, panic leaking through every word. We have a situation. The team can't move forward without your input. Name your rate. We can work something out. I looked out the window at the mountain sunlight flooding my new office. You fired me before sunrise, I said calmly. Good luck. I hung up. That night, I ate takeout alone in an apartment that suddenly felt a lot bigger. And for the first time all day, I slept. The next 9 days unfolded like a slow-motion demolition. From the outside, it probably looked sudden clients, terminating contracts, engineers resigning, executives scrambling to control a narrative that was already bleeding out. From where I stood, it was painfully predictable. You can only ignore reality for so long before it sends an invoice. Day 1 bled into day 2 without ceremony. Prism moved fast. No grand onboarding speeches. No slide decks about culture. They handed me access, introduced me to the teams, and asked one question that mattered. What do you need? By the end of the first week, I had an answer. The calls started coming in quietly at first. Former colleagues, analysts I'd mentored, engineers who trusted my judgment more than titles printed on org charts. Eddie texted constantly. Eddie, 3 engineers quit today, including Kim, the one you mentored since her first week. She said she couldn't work for people who treat employees like Warren treated you. Eddie HR tried to do exit interviews. She laughed and walked out. Then this one, Eddie Warren's assistant resigned, said she couldn't be part of whatever this is becoming. Her words, not mine. Advantage leadership was still pretending the problem was me. According to internal memos, I'd sabotaged documentation before leaving. Deleted files, created knowledge gaps. All lies. Eddie could see the documentation sitting untouched in the shared drive. Time-stamped, versioned, painstakingly organized. Truth just hadn't caught up yet. On day 5, Theo called again. First Continental's board voted to accelerate their contract evaluation, he said. They're not waiting 4 months. If Prism can present a migration plan in 2 weeks, we're prepared to move. This was the moment. Everything I'd built over 8 years, the architecture, the relationships, the trust was about to pay off. I worked 18 hours straight, mapped every integration point, every risk, every regulatory requirement, migration paths that wouldn't interrupt live fraud detection for a single second. 3 Prism engineers stayed late with me. Nobody complained. Nobody asked about overtime. They could feel it. We were building something real. Eddie's updates kept coming. Eddie Warren tried to schedule a damage control meeting with First Continental. They declined twice, then stopped responding entirely. Eddie found something interesting. Warren's assistant booked a conference room at 5:30 a.m. the morning you were fired. Catering order attached. Coffee and pastries, 2 people. So they'd been sitting in a conference room drinking coffee, preparing my termination while I was still asleep. Another message followed. Eddie Warren tried to retroactively change badge logs to show you left the building earlier the night before. I told him that's not how security systems work and also probably illegal. He did not enjoy that conversation. I saved everything. By day 7, Prism's presentation to First Continental took 4 hours. Every question had an answer. Every concern met with data. Their CTO asked about an integration challenge they'd struggled with at Vantage for years. I showed him how Prism had already solved it. Their compliance head asked about PCI certification timelines. I introduced her to our security team on the spot. They signed a letter of intent before leaving the building. Day 8, 4 more. Vantage clients reached out. Day 9, the board at Vantage called an emergency session that lasted 6 hours. According to Eddie, there was yelling. A lot of it. Warren tried to blame a coordinated attack by competitors and disgruntled former employees. That argument collapsed the moment the board saw the termination timeline Eddie had accidentally documented. That evening, Eddie sent one last text. Eddie, he's gone. Security walked him out at 4 p.m. cardboard box. Fancy laptop bag. Tried to argue he should keep his parking spot for another month. I laughed out loud. Somewhere in the city, a man who'd needed to be the smartest in every room was discovering what happens when arrogance meets evidence. And I was just getting started. The next 9 days unfolded like a slow-motion demolition. From the outside, it probably looked sudden. Clients terminating contracts, engineers resigning, executives scrambling to control a narrative that was already bleeding out. From where I stood, it was painfully predictable. You can only ignore reality for so long before it sends an invoice. Day 1 bled into day 2 without ceremony. Prism moved fast. No grand onboarding speeches, no slide decks about culture. They handed me access, introduced me to the teams, and asked one question that mattered. What do you need? By the end of the first week, I had an answer. The calls started coming in quietly at first. Former colleagues, analysts I'd mentored, engineers who trusted my judgment more than titles printed on org charts. Eddie texted constantly. Eddie, 3 engineers quit today, including Kim, the one you mentored since her first week. She said she couldn't work for people who treat employees like Warren treated you. Eddie HR tried to do exit interviews. She laughed and walked out. Then this one. Eddie Warren's assistant resigned. Said she couldn't be part of whatever this is becoming. Her words, not mine. Advantage leadership was still pretending the problem was me. According to internal memos, I'd sabotaged documentation before leaving. Deleted files, created knowledge gaps. All lies. Eddie could see the documentation sitting untouched in the shared drive. Time-stamped, versioned, painstakingly organized. Truth just hadn't caught up yet. On day 5, Theo called again. First Continental's board voted to accelerate their contract evaluation, he said. They're not waiting 4 months. If Prism can present a migration plan in 2 weeks, we're prepared to move. This was the moment. Everything I'd built over 8 years, the architecture, the relationships, the trust was about to pay off. I worked 18 hours straight, mapped every integration point, every risk, every regulatory requirement, migration paths that wouldn't interrupt live fraud detection for a single second. 3 Prism engineers stayed late with me. Nobody complained. Nobody asked about overtime. They could feel it. We were building something real. Eddie's updates kept coming. Eddie Warren tried to schedule a damage control meeting with First Continental. They declined twice, then stopped responding entirely. Eddie found something interesting. Warren's assistant booked a conference room at 5:30 a.m. the morning you were fired. Catering order attached. Coffee and pastries, 2 people. So they'd been sitting in a conference room drinking coffee, preparing my termination while I was still asleep. Another message followed. Eddie Warren tried to retroactively change badge logs to show you left the building earlier the night before. I told him that's not how security systems work and also probably illegal. He did not enjoy that conversation. I saved everything. By day 7, Prism's presentation to First Continental took 4 hours. Every question had an answer. Every concern met with data. Their CTO asked about an integration challenge they'd struggled with at Vantage for years. I showed him how Prism had already solved it. Their compliance head asked about PCI certification timelines. I introduced her to our security team on the spot. They signed a letter of intent before leaving the building. Day 8, 4 more Vantage clients reached out. Day 9, the board at Vantage called an emergency session that lasted 6 hours. According to Eddie, there was yelling. A lot of it. Warren tried to blame a coordinated attack by competitors and disgruntled former employees. That argument collapsed the moment the board saw the termination timeline Eddie had accidentally documented. That evening, Eddie sent one last text. Eddie, he's gone. Security walked him out at 4 p.m. cardboard box. Fancy laptop bag. Tried to argue he should keep his parking spot for another month. I laughed out loud. Somewhere in the city, a man who'd needed to be the smartest in every room was discovering what happens when arrogance meets evidence. And I was just getting started. Stop. Type. Continue when you're ready for part 6. The collapse begins. Continue. Part 6. The collapse begins. By the time Warren Hollister was escorted out of the building with a cardboard box, the damage was already irreversible. Executives like to believe that removing the villain fixes the story, that once the bad actor is gone, stability returns, confidence rebuilds, and the audience forgets the mess ever happened. That only works when the problem is a person. At Vantage, the problem was rot, and rot doesn't disappear just because you shine a light on it. Day 10 brought the first real public consequences. Vantage issued a carefully worded press release about organizational restructuring and a renewed commitment to delivery excellence. The market didn't buy it. Neither did the clients. Sentinel 3.0 was still 6 months behind schedule. The stripped-down roadmap leaked within hours. Analysts noticed missing features that had been promised in contracts. Compliance teams started asking pointed questions about certification timelines that no one at Vantage could answer with confidence. At Prism, we watched quietly, not out of malice, out of inevitability. The first call came from Coastal Pacific Credit Union's legal team. They wanted to know whether Prism could absorb their fraud operations without service interruption. The second came from a mid-sized European bank, whose leadership had lost faith entirely. The third from a payments consortium that had been on the fence for months and finally tipped. Every call followed the same pattern. They didn't ask about pricing first. They asked if I was involved. Trust had a name now. Vantage's internal communications spiraled. According to Eddie, who had become an unwilling war correspondent, HR was scrambling to contain resignations. Engineering managers were holding emergency meetings to reassure teams they couldn't actually reassure. Account managers were apologizing to clients for decisions they hadn't made and didn't understand. Eddie, people are scared, Jade. Like, actually scared. They keep asking if Prism is hiring. We were. Carefully. Competence is contagious, but so is panic. I refused to rebuild Vantage inside Prism. We hired engineers who understood systems, accountability, and consequences, people who didn't flinch when things broke because they knew how to fix them. By the end of the month, Prism had absorbed 4 former Vantage clients and nearly a dozen engineers. Vantage's stock dropped 14% in a week, then 28%, then 40%. The board tried to stabilize confidence by appointing an interim CEO. She lasted 90 days. The damage wasn't just technical, it was reputational. Once clients realized Vantage had fired the person who understood their systems better than anyone else and then tried to rewrite history to cover it up, trust evaporated. And in fintech, trust is the product. 6 months later, Sentinel finally shipped. Late, incomplete, unstable. Within weeks, clients reported false positives spiking. Legitimate transactions declined. Customer complaints surged. Regulators started circling again. Theo called me one afternoon, voice low. They're bleeding, he said. The board's talking about cutting the fraud division entirely. Dump it before it drags the rest of the company under. I wasn't surprised. 18 months after the morning they erased me, the email arrived. From Vantage's board. Not HR, not legal. The board. They wanted a meeting. I forwarded it to Cole with a single line. Looks like the door finally opened. He replied almost immediately. Let's walk through it. They laid it out plainly. The fraud division was underwater. Clients were leaving. Talent was gone. The brand was damaged beyond internal repair. They needed to sell fast and quietly. An asset purchase. Clean break. Prism acquired the division for roughly 30 cents on the dollar of its former valuation. We kept the engineers worth keeping, fixed the roadmap, migrated the remaining clients. I became head of combined fraud operations. 93 people, largest fraud detection team in the industry. The irony wasn't lost on me. Eddie stopped by my office that afternoon, spun once in my chair, and laughed. This is genuinely insane, he said. I cleared your termination ticket at 5:38 a.m. Now you own the division. Funny how documentation works, I said. That evening, as I was packing up, the front desk called. Jade, the receptionist, said carefully, "There's someone in the lobby asking for you." I already knew. She says her name is Jenna. I closed my laptop. Send her up. The elevator doors opened slowly, like the building itself was giving me time to reconsider. Jenna stepped out and hesitated, scanning the hallway as if she wasn't sure she belonged there. She looked different. Thinner. Tired around the eyes. The polished confidence I remembered, the one that had once filled rooms and demanded attention, was gone, replaced by something brittle and cautious. "Hi, Jade," she said softly. I didn't stand up right away. I let the silence stretch, not out of cruelty, but because this was the first time since everything fell apart that the moment actually belonged to me. "I know I shouldn't be here," she continued. I heard about the acquisition." I nodded once. "You heard right." She took a step forward, hands clasped in front of her like she was waiting for a verdict. "I made a mistake," she said, "leaving the way I did. I panicked when you got fired. I didn't handle it well." That was one way to phrase it. I leaned back in my chair, watching her carefully. "You were already gone, Jenna. The firing just made it easier to walk away." Her lips pressed together. She didn't deny it. That was stupid," she said finally. "I know that now." I stood, grabbed my jacket from the back of the chair. The conversation had already reached its natural end. You walked out while I was still processing the worst day of my career, I said. You weren't confused. You made a choice. She swallowed. I thought you'd understand. I did, I replied. Eventually. I moved past her and pressed the elevator button. The doors opened almost immediately. So that's it, she asked quietly. That was it, I said. 18 months ago. We're just catching up. I stepped inside. The doors slid shut between us, cutting off whatever she might have said next. That night I drove home through empty streets with the windows down the city quiet in a way it never used to be. I thought about the distance between that early morning video call and now, about how close I'd come to believing I was disposable, about how many decisions had been made for me without my consent and how many I'd finally made for myself. Some doors close because they were never meant to stay open. Some people leave because they were never really there. And sometimes the worst thing that happens to you turns out to be the reason you end up exactly where you're supposed to be. The months that followed were quieter but not calmer. At Prism, work moved with a kind of focused intensity I hadn't realized I'd been missing for years. No one postured, no one hid behind jargon. Decisions were made, defended, and owned. When something broke, we fixed it. When someone made a mistake, we corrected it without theatrics. It was exhausting in the right way. My team grew fast. 15 people became 30. 30 became 50. By the end of the year, we were the largest fraud detection unit in the industry, not because we chased scale, but because clients chased us. Word spreads when competence replaces chaos. Former Vantage employees filtered in carefully one by one. Some were brilliant and burned out. Others were shaken, still trying to understand how a place they'd trusted could collapse so quickly. I didn't ask them to relive it. I just asked what they wanted to build next. Eddie joined in month 2. Officially, his title was head of IT operations. Unofficially, he became the connective tissue of the company, fixing systems, spotting problems before they turned into disasters, and telling the truth even when it made executives uncomfortable. Turns out, when you let someone who's been underestimated for years actually do the job they're good at, the results speak for themselves. First Continental finalized their migration in week 3. The contract was larger than the one they'd walked away from at Vantage. Their fraud losses dropped within the first quarter. False positives were cut nearly in half. Regulators stopped calling. Theo sent me a short message after the first monthly report. This is what it feels like when the platform actually works. By month 3, 4 more enterprise clients followed, all former Vantage customers. Every single one cited the same reason in their exit summaries. Confidence. Not in the company, in the people. Vantage, meanwhile, continued its slow unraveling. The interim CEO resigned. 3 board members followed. Internal emails leaked about missed certifications and emergency patchwork fixes. Analysts downgraded the stock again. The fraud division, what was left of it, became a liability no one wanted to touch. From the outside, it probably looked like revenge. From the inside, it felt more like watching a building collapse after the supports were removed. Loud at first, then quiet, then inevitable. I didn't celebrate. I didn't need to. The work was enough. At the 1-year mark, Cole invited me into his office and closed the door. We're promoting you to the executive team, he said. Not because of what happened at Vantage, because of what you built here. I slept 7 hours a night after that. Didn't realize how much the constant stress had been carving pieces out of me until it was gone. Around that time, I heard through industry gossip that Jenna's situation hadn't ended well. The man she'd left with had a fiancé in another city. She'd been the side story without realizing it. I felt nothing. Not satisfaction, not sadness, just distance. 18 months after Warren Hollister fired me before sunrise, I stood in a conference room overlooking the city, signing off on the final integration documents that officially folded Vantage's old fraud division into Prism. Same industry, same work, completely different ending. As I shut down my computer and reached for my coat, I realized something had shifted. I wasn't watching from the front row anymore. I was building the stage. The building was almost empty by the time I finished signing the last document. Lights dimmed automatically floor by floor as people filtered out the quiet, settling in like a held breath. I stayed later than usual that night, not because I had to, but because for the first time in a long while, I wasn't rushing to escape my own thoughts. The front desk phone rang just as I was packing my bag. Jade, the receptionist, said, voice careful. Someone's here asking for you. Says it's important. I already knew who it was. I walked down anyway. Jenna stood near the security desk, hands folded, posture tight like she was bracing for impact. Up close, the changes were clearer. The confidence she used to wear so effortlessly was gone, replaced by something quieter and uncertain. I heard you were still here, she said. I didn't know if you'd want to see me. I didn't, I replied honestly. But you're here now. She nodded. I just wanted to say, I'm sorry for how I left, for what I didn't see at the time. I studied her for a moment, searching for the familiar pull that used to live somewhere in my chest. It wasn't there. You weren't wrong to leave, I said. You were wrong about why. She exhaled slowly. I thought stability meant control, predictability. I didn't understand what you were building. I didn't need understanding, I said. I needed trust. She looked down, then back up. Is there any chance? I smiled, not unkindly. No, I said, but I hope you figure things out. And I meant it. I walked out of the building a few minutes later, the city stretching wide and quiet in front of me. The air was cool. The streets nearly empty. The kind of night where everything feels possible because nothing is demanding your attention. 18 months earlier, I'd been fired before sunrise by a man who thought I was disposable. I'd lost a relationship that had already been slipping through my fingers, watched a company bleed itself dry trying to deny reality, and somehow ended up in a place where my work mattered more than politics, where competence was currency, and where no one needed me to be small to feel important. Some doors closed because they were never meant to stay open. Some people leave because they were never really there. And sometimes the best thing that can happen to you is getting fired at 6 in the morning by someone who has no idea what they're about to lose. The view from here was clear, and it was mine.